Millionaire dad comes home early and finds his son clinging to the maid, begging him not to take her. The door creaked open before Grant Ellison even stepped inside. His polished Italian leather shoes touched the marble tiles of his private foyer, and the wheels of his sleek black suitcase trailed behind him with a soft rattle that echoed in the cavernous space. The familiar scent of his home, polished wood and expensive candles, should have welcomed him, but something felt different today. He looked every bit the man who'd closed million-dollar deals across Europe. Tailored white suit, crisp despite the transatlantic flight, violet dress shirt that cost more than most people's monthly salary, designer watch catching the afternoon light, filtering through crystal windows. Yet nothing about his confident exterior revealed how unprepared he was for what awaited him in his own kitchen. He wasn't supposed to be back until Friday. The Geneva deal had closed 2 days early, and the quiet smile tugging at his lips spoke of anticipated joy. His fingers found the small teddy bear tied to the suitcase handle, Lucas's favorite character, soft brown fur worn from countless nights of comfort. He hadn't seen his son in over 4 weeks, and this surprise homecoming would light up those wide blue eyes, make up for all the missed bedtimes and empty mornings. He could already imagine it. Lucas charging into his arms with that infectious giggle, small hands grabbing at his jacket, breathless words tumbling over each other in excitement. The fantasy had sustained him through sleepless nights in sterile hotel rooms. Instead, as he stepped into the kitchen doorway, his heart seized. There at the sink stood a woman he didn't immediately recognize, a black woman wearing a gray apron tied around her slender waist, a dark, short-sleeved top beneath. Her arms were braced against the edge of the marble counter as if holding herself upright, her head lowered so that her natural curls fell like a curtain around her face. But her shoulders trembled with the unmistakable rhythm of someone fighting to breathe through tears. She wasn't crying softly or discreetly. This was the kind of quiet breakdown that shook a person to their core, the kind that spoke of something far deeper than spilled milk or broken dish, a physical blow, stealing his breath and leaving him reeling. In all his imagined homecomings, nothing had prepared him for his son's first words being a plea to protect someone else. I'm sorry, sir," the woman stammered, her voice tight and hoarse from crying. He won't let go." Grant took another step inside, his expensive shoes silent on the kitchen tiles. The smell of something burned lingered in the air. Rice, he realized, noting the abandoned pot on the stove. "What is going on here? Who are you?" "I'm Nia Monroe," she said, trying to gently lower Lucas to the floor even as the boy's grip tightened around her neck. "The agency sent me last month when Ms. Rena quit. We spoke on the phone twice." Grant blinked, his mind struggling to process. Yes, Nia. She had possessed a soft, professional voice on the phone, had answered his rapid-fire questions about experience and references with calm competence. He had approved her hiring without much thought, trusting the agency to handle the details. But he had never expected this. This raw emotion, this desperate clinging, this scene that looked more like a family in crisis than an employer returning home. Lucas was shaking now, his small hands fisting in Nia's apron. "Please, Daddy, don't send her away. Please, she didn't do anything wrong." "Send her away?" Grant repeated, stunned by the assumption. "Why would I burned the rice," Nia whispered, her voice bitter with self-recrimination. "That's why I'm crying. but not because I'm afraid of you." She took a shuddering breath, and when she continued, her words cracked like breaking glass. "It's because Lucas told me he wished I was his mommy." The kitchen fell silent, except for the soft hiss of the forgotten pot on the stove. Grant stared, unable to form words, his throat working soundlessly as the implications crashed over him. "I didn't ask for that," Nia continued, her voice trembling but gaining strength, as if confessing a sin she'd carried alone too long. "I didn't try to take anyone's place. She paused, her dark eyes finding his with startling directness. "He had nightmares, sir. Every night he called for someone, anyone, and there was no one but me. I sang to him, held him when he shook. He needed someone." Grant's stomach twisted violently. Images flashed through his mind. Sterile hotel rooms in Geneva, conference calls that ran past midnight, text messages from previous caretakers that he'd skimmed and forgotten. Rena had mentioned something about Lucas screaming in his sleep, but he'd assumed it was a phase, something children outgrew like fear of monsters under the bed. Now he realized it wasn't a phase. It was abandonment, dressed up in designer clothes and justified by bank statements. Lucas was shaking his head violently, still begging through hiccuping sobs. "She helps me breathe, Daddy. When the scary dreams come, she helps me breathe." Nia looked away, pressing her lips together as if trying to hold back a dam of emotion. "I'm not asking to stay. I didn't realize how deep I was in until he said that. Until I realized I love him like—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Grant had conquered rooms full of hostile executives, had dominated boardrooms across 3 continents, but now in his own kitchen, facing his son's tears and this stranger's fierce love, he was utterly speechless. His son, the center of his universe, the reason behind every deal and dollar earned, was clinging to a maid he barely knew, and she, this woman whose last name he'd nearly forgotten, looked more broken-hearted than anyone Grant had ever seen. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he said, the words barely audible. "Working, building something for him, a future without limits." Nia's response came quietly, but it cut deeper than any boardroom confrontation. "Money doesn't sing to a child at night, Mr. Ellison, or hold their hand after a bad dream. It can't kiss away scraped knees or celebrate the first successful trip down the big slide." Lucas finally slid down from her arms, but stayed pressed against her side like a plant turning toward sunlight. Grant's voice cracked when he spoke. "And what are you to him now?" Nia paused, her hand instinctively moving to stroke Lucas's hair. When she answered, it was with the simplicity of absolute truth. "Safe." Grant stood motionless, his expensive white suit a stark contrast to the warm, lived-in chaos of the kitchen. The pot on the stove continued its gentle hiss, the burned rice forgotten and growing cold. In that moment, the empire he'd built, the deals, the accolades, the international success, felt as distant as stars, beautiful but offering no warmth. The silence stretched until Grant found his voice again, quieter now, more human. "You said he cried at night. Why didn't anyone tell me it was this bad?" Nia looked at him with an expression that suggested he'd asked why water was wet. "Who would have listened, sir? You were in Geneva or Dubai or wherever people like you go when you can't bear to sleep in your own beds." The words weren't meant to wound, but they did. Lucas flinched slightly at the tension in the air, and Nia immediately caught the movement, her hand finding his head, her voice dropping to a gentle whisper. "It's okay, baby. No one's mad at you." "I'm not mad at him," Grant said quickly, recognizing the fear in his son's posture. "Then show him," Nia replied, her eyes sharp and unafraid as they fixed on Grant. "He's 4 years old. He can't decode your silence or translate your absence into love. All he knows is that you leave and come back with teddy bears instead of hugs." The observation hit its target perfectly. Grant blinked, realizing that this woman, this stranger he'd hired with barely a thought, was protecting Lucas with the fierce devotion of a lioness defending her cub. That realization landed harder than any criticism of his parenting ever could. "I worked 18-hour days for 4 weeks straight," Grant said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought if I secured that one deal, it would pay for his future, college, graduate school, a life with no financial limits." Nia's voice softened in response, though she didn't retreat from her position. "But he doesn't understand college, Mr. Ellison. He just wants pancakes on Saturday mornings, someone to clap when he jumps off the couch and shouts, 'Look at me!' Someone who remembers that he likes his sandwiches cut into triangles, not squares." Lucas looked up at his father now, his blue eyes still swimming with tears, but cautious, uncertain. The hope and fear warring in that small face nearly destroyed Grant's composure. "I didn't know," Grant said, lowering his suitcase to the floor with a soft thud. "You didn't ask," Nia replied gently, but without hesitation or apology. A silence passed between them, heavy, honest, transformative. Grant walked to the stool by the kitchen island and sat down heavily. The immaculate suit, the expensive watch that cost more than most cars, none of it mattered now. He looked at his son, really looked, and noticed details that struck him like physical blows. The shadows under those young eyes, the tired way Lucas leaned into Nia's body like she was a wall that had held him up through too many lonely nights. "Lucas," he said gently, opening his arms. His son didn't respond immediately, so Grant tried again, his voice softer, more patient than any tone he'd used in boardrooms. This time, he simply opened his arms wider, making himself vulnerable, making the invitation clear. Lucas hesitated, and in that hesitation, Grant saw the damage his absence had wrought. His son didn't run like Grant had fantasized about during those lonely hotel nights. Instead, Lucas stepped forward slowly, like someone learning to trust again, like someone who had been disappointed before and couldn't bear another abandonment. When he finally reached his father's arms, Lucas didn't throw himself into the embrace. He melted slowly, like someone testing the warmth of water before fully committing, like he needed to know this wasn't another brief moment before another departure. Grant wrapped his arms around his son, squeezing tight, breathing in the familiar scent of childhood, soap and innocence, and something indefinably precious. "I'm sorry, buddy. I didn't know how lonely you were." Lucas's voice was muffled against his father's expensive shirt. "Don't make her leave." Grant looked up at Nia, whose eyes had filled with fresh tears, but she didn't wipe them away or try to hide her emotion. She stood rooted in place, her fingers twisting the fabric of her apron, vulnerability and strength warring in her expression. "I don't want her to leave either," Grant said softly, and watched Nia's lips part in surprise. "Sir, please stay," he interrupted, not just as an employer now, but as a father recognizing salvation when he saw it. Not just as the maid, but as someone who genuinely cares about him. Maybe maybe as someone who can help me learn how to be what he needs." Nia's expression shifted through a kaleidoscope of emotions: caution, confusion, and then slowly, carefully, something warmer. "I don't want to cross any lines," she said quietly. "Cross them," Grant replied without hesitation. "If that's what it takes for him to feel safe again, cross every line that needs crossing." The pot on the stove continued to bubble. The burned rice still clung to the bottom, forgotten and cooling, but nobody moved to address it. Food could wait. Schedules could wait. Everything could wait for this moment of rebuilding. Grant reached for the teddy bear from his suitcase and handed it to Lucas. "I brought this for you, but I should have brought myself sooner." Lucas accepted the bear but didn't let go of his father, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't cry. The three of them existed in that kitchen tableau, imperfect, complicated, but somehow complete. Nia watched them both and exhaled slowly, the tension she'd carried for hours finally leaving her shoulders. Her arms fell to her sides as the fear of dismissal faded. For so long, she had felt like a ghost in this house, someone whose care existed only in shadows and silence. But now, in this moment of crisis turned revelation, she was visible, valued, essential. Later that evening, after Lucas had fallen asleep in his father's lap while they watched cartoons on the living room sofa, Grant found Nia in the kitchen, wiping down the stove with quiet efficiency. She turned as he approached, and the wariness in her eyes had softened. "I know this wasn't the job you expected," he said. "It's not," she agreed with characteristic honesty. "But it's the job I needed." He nodded, understanding flowing between them. "If you ever want something more, training, school, whatever dreams you put aside, you'll have my support. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Don't stop being who you were today. For him." Nia smiled, tired but genuine. "I won't. I couldn't if I tried." As Grant walked back toward the living room where his son slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, he paused and looked over his shoulder. "Nia?" "Yes." "Thank you for saving my son." She didn't answer with words. She simply nodded once and turned back to the stove, where a new pot of rice had begun to simmer, this time with the patience and attention that came from knowing someone would be there to share the meal.